Hey everybody, Chris Delano here with IPD and welcome to IPD Shop. And today we're going to go over how to change your oil in the 3.2 liter non-turbo 6-cylinder engines and the 3 liter T6 single turbo engines. Some of you might be looking at this video and thinking, it's really easy to change your oil, but you know, to some people it might not be. And we spend a lot of money maintaining our Volvo. And if you want to maintain your Volvo or take something on yourself, this video is going to help you change the oil in one of those 3.2s or the 3 liter T6 engines with ease, and IPD is going to cover all right here for you. So a couple things that you're going to need to buy is definitely one, a replacement oil filter. Obviously, you need to get some oil. I'll go over all the oil specifications that this model actually recommends and the amount of quarts that you'll have to purchase. We're also going to talk about this oil filter housing removal cap tool that we actually sell here. I'll be using that today to remove the oil filter cap assembly so we can get to the oil filter itself. And then all you're going to need is some common hand tools like a 3/8 driver or a long extension. Makes the job a little bit easier to reach. So we're going to get started at that right now. All right, so the first question is, where do you start? The first thing is that you're always going to want to do is make sure that you're working on your car safe. So make sure and jack your car properly, have jack stands or use ramps. We recommend using ramps. On some models, if you're working on in your driveway or in the garage, you may be able to get underneath there without even jacking up the car at all. For this video, I'm going to be using our lift just so I can demonstrate where things are. It's a little bit easier access for us to film. But make sure and be safe. Look at your owner's manual for proper jacking points and how to properly support your car to be safe while changing your oil if this is the first time that you're attempting to do so. Moving on, the first thing is that normally you would start underneath the car by cracking the drain plug and draining all the oil out of the engine. On these particular models that we're working on today, things are a little bit backwards, and we're going to talk about that. It's a really neat little trick. Before shooting this video, I asked some of our product team members to look at what Vita is the basically how-to guide from Volvo on how to change oil in this car. I just wanted to see what proper steps they had. The product team noticed that the first step was to get underneath the vehicle and to go ahead and drain the oil by loosening up the drain bolt and letting it drain out. IPD's got a little bit of a tech tip for you. If you're like me and you like to keep things tidy and clean and not so messy, and you'll see why it can be a mess, the first step that we want to go after is actually loosening up the oil filter housing cap. The reason why is that you'll notice that this right here, this is basically the whole oil filter housing is bolted up to the front of the block right here, down in this little area, which we'll show you what that looks like in a moment, is facing upward. Now think about this, when your oil filter housing is full of oil, if you don't drain this filter housing right here, basically you're pulling the oil filter out with all of the oil inside this housing, and then when you drag it out of the car, which you'll see there's not a lot of room, it just creates a mess. So what we like to do is loosen the oil cap. Basically, you loosen it up enough to where it's just resting on the housing. And what that does is it releases the oil filter from pressing on a valve that's in here. And once that valve is released, it allows all the oil that's inside this housing to drain back down into the oil pan. I would say you loosen that up, and then we're gonna go underneath the car to go ahead and drain the oil. So I'm gonna do that step first. So here's your power steering reservoir. It's on a tab. It simply lifts up off the tab. It's got 2 rubber hoses, so you can kind of manipulate this. You're not going to break anything. You can push it down a little bit. I like to push mine down and underneath the manifold and just tuck it out of the way. And then that completely exposes the oil filter housing and cap right down there. That's what we need to access right there. Some people might take the reservoir and stretch it and pull it up and over the side here. I like to push mine down and underneath the intake manifold so I have complete access to the oil filter housing. Here is the tool that's going to go ahead and loosen that housing cap. IPD sells this. I'll float the part number over the screen for you. I'm going to use a 3/8 extension. That way it makes it easier to get to. You want to make sure you have a really good direct contact with the top of the cap so we don't strip it. And then a 3/8 socket wrench. And I'm going to go right down over the top of that housing. So I've got a really good contact. The tool is over the top. I'm spinning the housing counterclockwise off of taking the cap off of the housing, and I'm just doing it enough to where it gets loose and it's just resting on top of the housing. There's no need to fully remove that cap and out of the way because it's going to pull the filter out right now, but right now that I loosened it, it's relieved that valve and the oil is draining down into the pan. Okay, so now that I've loosened up the cap, again, I've loosened it just to the point to where the cap right here is loose. It's just resting on the housing. If you pull it all the way out right now, it's gonna be full of oil and this is gonna get messy. So right now it's just resting, and we've relieved the pressure off of a check valve that's down here, or a little valve assembly that when you put the filter in, it pushes on it and it seals it. Once you remove this, it actually lifts up on that valve and the oil is allowed to drain down into the pan. So right now the oil is draining. I'm gonna go ahead and lift up the car and get underneath the vehicle. All right, so once you get underneath your car, what you're gonna run into, if you have the factory cloth OEM underguard or under engine protection plate on your vehicle, you do have to remove it. The factory plate does not come with any maintenance holes. It's got little louvers here for air and stuff like that, but it doesn't have any way to access the actual drain pan bolt. So you will have to remove it. One thing that you want to do while you order your cars, inspect this. They get really mushy. It is made out of fabric, like cardboard material. It might not be a bad idea to upgrade yours or replace this while you're there. IPD carries a factory OEM replacement. And we also have an upgraded skid plate on the car, which this car, one of our project cars, actually does incorporate a maintenance hole here. So, holding in my hand really quick, we have one of our aluminum skid plates, and it does have a maintenance hole here, so you can drain the oil and you don't have to remove this big old protection plate that does take care of your engine. So we're gonna go ahead and loosen up this oil pan bolt and drain the oil with our HD skid plate on the car. All right, so here, our skid plate allows you to see the bottom of the oil pan. It does have a little bolt here. Another thing that you'll need is a new crush washer. We do sell those, and I'll make sure and float the part number for you. Use a 17mm wrench. You can use a socket and a socket wrench, or just an open end wrench works perfect. Go ahead and get it on here. Once you crack it, you can go ahead and loosen it by hand, and then you gotta be ready, because the second you remove that, oil's obviously gonna come out, so you wanna have your pan positioned maybe a little bit in front of it. So once the oil drain bolt removes, there we go. You can never have enough disposable rags or paper towels when you're changing the oil in your car. One of the things I like to do is, like, I've got the drain bolt in my hand, I'm gonna use the drain bolt and replace the crush washer, but I like to wipe everything down and get it ready for reinstallation. Make sure and let the oil drain from the bottom of your engine oil pan until you don't see any more. It's gonna get to a drip. I like to just let it sit. If you have other things you can do, like clean or work on your tools or anything, just be patient and let that drip out. And once it gets to a little bit of a drip, that's when I would say it'd be safe to go ahead and put the drain bolt back into the oil pan with a new crush washer. All right, so we've been waiting about 5 to maybe 7 minutes now, and we're getting close to a dribble, so I'm about ready to put the drain bolt or the oil pan bolt back into the oil pan. I'm gonna replace the crush washer, make sure that the old one's not stuck to the back of the oil pan, but we're gonna go ahead and replace the crush washer here on the oil pan bolt. And I'm gonna go ahead and thread it back in. Get a little bit of oil leak there, it'll stop. I'm gonna get it threaded in as far as I can do it by hand. I'm gonna wipe up around the bottom of the oil pan, around the surface where the bolt goes, because oil does like to splatter there. And on this particular car, because I do have a skid plate with an access hole, there's a little bit of oil that does splash up around here. I like to wipe that up. So we'll go and clean up a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and tighten up the oil drain bolt. Okay, the drain bolt's in there finger tight. Now that I've wiped everything down, I cleaned up all the oil that splashed around after I pulled the oil drain bolt out. Got some stuff cleaned up off our skid plate here. I'm gonna go and use my 17mm, and I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this down. Right now, we're gonna go ahead and get rid of the oil, move it out of the way. We're gonna go to the top of the car. Okay, this is where we potentially make a little bit of a mess. We get a little bit of oil leak, but at least we minimize that by relieving that check valve inside the oil filter housing and letting the oil drain down to the oil pan that we just drained out. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish unscrewing and pulling off the oil filter cap. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just snake it out of this area right here. And as you can see, it's got the oil filter in it right there. And it's a lot less mess because the oil was drained out of that housing down there. But I do have a little bit of cleanup to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and wipe up some of the areas there just from where the oil where I dripped out from this filter down into this area. All right, so I'm using one of my disposable rags, and I'm just cleaning up a few of the oil drips that were down inside the engine compartment right next to the housing. Not much, but I'm just wiping up a few because I don't like to leave my workspace messy, like a lot of you that are watching this video. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just wipe up a little bit around the inside of the housing here where the threads are, and just make sure and get that oil off of the threads, new clean surface for the oil filter cap to thread into, so we make a nice good seal. So basically, this is sitting down here on the engine block like so. Oil filter's out. I'm just taking a rag and I'm going around right here on the inside, cleaning up a little bit of oil that's left over around the threads where the oil filter cap threads into right here. All right, now it's time to replace the oil filter. It's really simple. This just kind of presses into place, so you'll just pop it off of the surface here, or off the center part of the oil cap or the housing cap. Pull it off, then we're gonna dispose that guy. Good shot. And then the other thing that you want to do is a new oil filter comes with the oil filter and a new O-ring for the cap for the housing. Remember where the O-ring goes, it can only go into one little channel here, so I'm going to go ahead and get a small thin blade screwdriver or a pick tool. I'm going to remove this O-ring from this cap. I'm going to go ahead and use a pick tool. I'm going to go and grab that O-ring and just pull it off. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of a larger line here where the new O-ring is going to go. And like we mentioned before, it's nice to go ahead and keep things nice, clean, and tidy for reinstallation. I'm going to take my new O-ring. I'm going to go ahead and get it right there around the outside and get it up into the channel. There we go. And then you take your new oil filter here. Now Volvo does use MAN. I believe that these are the actual OES or original equipment supplier to Volvo is MAN. So we have MAN, Mala, and the OEM ones available on our website. But I went ahead and grabbed a MAN filter here. And all you do is set it over the top there, press it into place. Now you think that it's good when you just push it down, but actually you can go a little bit further and snapping it in place. So you make sure that it's all the way snapped down, otherwise you won't be able to get this threaded all the way down into place when you reinstall it onto the housing. So now it's all nice and clean, it's ready to be installed. You can do this by hand to get it going, and then we'll finish it off using the cap wrench and tool that we took it off with. I'm gonna go ahead and maneuver this down over the housing, and I'm gonna go ahead and thread it by hand. I'm gonna thread it until it gives me a little bit of resistance, which usually is right at the O-ring. I can't turn it by hand anymore with the O-ring. I'm gonna have to use the tool. Once you thread this thing down by hand and you use the tool, you can see it kind of stops right there because we're butted up against the O-ring. You'll use the tool to finish it off. It'll be a little bit tighter, but once it's done, it's done. This thing will actually stop. It won't keep threading, you can't strip it. You're just gonna go ahead and put the cap wrench back on it, tighten it until it completely stops. Get a nice, good surface right on the top. I'm directly on top of that. And I'm gonna turn it, and I can hear it pushing past the O-ring. And you just keep going until it stops. I can't pull on it anymore. We're done. Remove the cap from the top, don't leave it in there. Move your tools, and voila, you're done with the oil filter. Now that you've completely put the oil filter in place and you've gotten the cap to the housing sealed and tightened down, don't forget to put your power steering reservoir back in place. I tucked mine underneath the intake manifold. I'm just gonna push down, pull it back into position, line up these tabs, and put it into its bracket. Good, we're all secure. All right, thanks for hanging with me. We're getting close to being done here on the oil change. Next is adding oil to the engine. Now these cars call for 7.8 quarts. That includes filling up the oil filter housing as well. So 7.8, so that means that you're gonna have to buy 8 quarts of oil. I recommend adding 7.5 and then starting the car, shutting it off, letting it sit for a few minutes, and then we'll recheck it on the dipstick. And if we need to add a little bit more, we can do so, but it's gonna call for 7.8. It's almost 8. I know a lot of people out there would just probably get 8, dump 8 into it, but we don't wanna overfill it. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the 7.5, then I'll start it, and I'll recheck the dipstick, and then we'll go from there. If I need to add a little bit more to top it off, we can do so. It holds a lot of oil, so we're gonna get started. First thing that you need to do is take off the oil cap here on top of the engine by unscrewing it counterclockwise. It's usually about a 45-degree turn, and it comes out. Now when you're adding the oil to your car, you can utilize another tool like a oil filler or an oil funnel that'll come in here. You know, makes it easier so you don't spill oil on the top of your engine cover. If you've got a steady hand, you can go ahead and show how cool you are and just go ahead and pour it right into the top there without spilling. So we're gonna go and begin that. I am gonna go ahead and use a little funnel that we have here in the shop and get started. Here we go, just gonna insert our funnel there, position it right upright, and we'll begin to pour the oil. First oil quart. Okay, so here we are adding the last quart. I'm only gonna do about 7.5, so I'm gonna do about 1/2 quart. You can usually look at the side of the bottle and see the windows. And there we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my rag so I don't drip any oil. Take the funnel out of the way, wipe the bottom. And then I'm gonna go ahead and replace the oil cap. I'm gonna start the engine, and then I'm gonna let it run for a few minutes. I'm gonna turn the engine off, let all the oil drain down to the oil pan, and then we'll go ahead and check the oil on the dipstick and see where we're at. Okay, once you start the car, it's a good idea to go ahead and peek underneath and check your drain plug, make sure it's not leaking. Also look at the oil filter housing, make sure that it's sealed and not leaking. Okay, I went ahead and I cycled the engine here. I went ahead and let it run for a few minutes. I turned it off. I let it sit for a few minutes. Now I'm gonna go ahead and pull the oil dipstick. Don't wanna leak any oil here. Now it's gonna be really hard to see on the dipstick here, but you've got these little hash marks on the dipstick. And what you wanna do is make sure that when you put the oil stick back down the tube and seat it all the way, that the oil comes all the way up to the top of those lines. Okay, and as you can see, I added 7.5 quarts. We're not quite there yet. So I'm gonna go ahead, top it off, and do the same thing and keep checking until we get the oil right up to that top line. Okay, so I went ahead and I added 7.8, maybe a little bit more. I'm gonna go ahead and put the dipstick back down into the tube, let it seat all the way, bring it back out. And as you can see, the oil is right there at the top of the hash marks. We are good to go and ready to drive. So make sure and replace the oil dip back into place. Make sure to replace the oil cap. We don't want to start the engine with the oil cap off now that you've checked and topped everything off. Put it in place, turn it about 45 degrees. You are good to go. We always appreciate you watching these videos, and we hope it helps. If you have additional questions outside of looking in your owner's manual for oil or specifications or what type of oil to use, obviously we're here to help you. We want to make sure and get you set up with an oil change kit, all the right filters, crush washers, or any tools that make the job easier. So make sure and give our customer service agents a call at 800-444-6473. We would love to chat with you. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon.